The world was ending in flames. Naruto Uzumaki stood atop the shattered remains of what had once been the Valley of the End, his clothes torn and drenched in blood that might have been his own or someone else's. He could no longer tell. The valley itself was a monument to destruction. Entire mountainsides had collapsed, forests had been incinerated, and the earth itself seemed to weep with the scars of their battle. He could barely stand. His body screamed in agony, each breath a knife sliding between his ribs. The nine-tailed fox's chakra, his chakra now, truly his own after all these years, flickered weakly within him, nearly depleted. He had poured everything into this final confrontation, every ounce of strength, every technique, every ounce of determination that had defined his existence. Sasuke lay unconscious 20 meters away. Even from this distance, Naruto could see the gentle rise and fall of his chest. His best friend. His rival. The person he had sworn to bring back from darkness, even if it meant sacrificing his own light. But the cost had been catastrophic. A shadow fell across Naruto's face, not from clouds, but from the figure descending from the sky. Not Sasuke. Something far older. Far more terrible. The Otsutsuki. A being that had slipped through the dimensional seals, a remnant of a threat that should have been sealed away centuries ago. In the chaos of the final battle, while Naruto had been focused entirely on Sasuke, on bringing him back, this ancient deity had emerged from a hidden pocket of reality. Impressive, little one, the creature spoke, its voice like grinding stone. To wield such power, and not understand its true nature. The Rinnegan would be wasted on you. Naruto tried to move, to gather what remained of his strength, but his body refused to obey. He had nothing left. The nine-tailed fox's chakra had dried up, leaving him as fragile as glass. The Otsutsuki raised its hand, and Naruto felt a terrible pulling sensation, as though his very soul was being torn from his body. His vision blurred. His hearing faded to a distant ringing. Was this death? Was this what the end felt like? In his final moments, as consciousness slipped away, Naruto's last thought was of Konoha. Of Kakashi and Sakura. Of Iruka and the ramen shop owner. Of everyone he had promised to protect. He had failed them all. The first sensation Naruto felt was warmth, sunlight. Golden and gentle, streaming through a window he didn't remember seeing before. His eyes felt impossibly heavy, as though someone had placed stones upon his eyelids. He tried to move his hand, a monumental task, and found that even this simple action sent signals of confusion through his nervous system. Where was he? Slowly, with the patience of someone learning to exist again, Naruto opened his eyes. The world resolved into focus gradually, a wooden ceiling with exposed beams, white plaster walls, and the faint smell of lavender mixed with something medicinal. A hospital room, but not one he recognized. The architecture was different, older somehow, with traditional wooden furnishings that suggested a place from centuries past rather than the modern medical facilities of Konoha. Naruto tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in his body protested, screaming that it had been unused for far too long. How long had he been unconscious? Hours? Days? Easy, young one, a soft voice said from somewhere to his left. You're safe now. Naruto turned his head slowly, careful not to aggravate whatever injuries plagued his body. An elderly woman sat beside his bed, knitting needles clicking steadily in her weathered hands. Her hair was white as snow, her face a map of wrinkles that spoke of a long life lived. She wore simple clothes, dyed with natural colors that suggested she was far from any major village. Where am I? Naruto's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. A small monastery to the northeast, the woman replied without looking up from her knitting. My grandson found you 3 weeks ago, collapsed in the forest near here. You've been unconscious ever since. The healers weren't certain you would survive. Several times we thought. She trailed off, shaking her head. 3 weeks. The number felt unreal. What happened? Naruto pressed, memories fragmenting and reforming in his mind. The battle. Sasuke. The Otsutsuki. The sensation of his soul being torn away. I was fighting. You were dying, the woman said simply, finally setting down her knitting to look at him with surprisingly sharp eyes. By all rights you should be dead. But something changed. The healers found no wounds on your body, no injuries that would have caused such a prolonged unconsciousness. It was as though. She paused, considering her words carefully, as though something awakened within you. Something that required all your strength to accept. The woman's description was vague, yet Naruto found himself believing her. Something had awakened. He could feel it now that she mentioned it, a presence in his mind, vast and intricate, like an entirely new sense that was slowly coming online. It was as though his consciousness had expanded to include dimensions of perception he had never known existed. I need to leave, Naruto said suddenly, pushing himself up on his elbows despite his body's protests. I need to get back to Konoha. My friends, your friends think you're dead, the woman interrupted gently. The news spread 3 weeks ago. A great ninja fell in battle. A memorial stone has been erected. Your funeral rites were performed. The words struck Naruto like a physical blow. Dead. Everyone thought he was dead. Kakashi, Sakura, the Hokage. They were all grieving for him. The thought was almost more painful than the injuries that plagued his body. I need to go back, he repeated. But his body betrayed him, collapsing back onto the bed as exhaustion overtook him. I need to tell them. Tell them what? The woman asked, her tone carrying a peculiar weight. That you've returned from the dead? That something miraculous saved you? Naruto Uzumaki, do you not realize what you carry within you? Naruto froze at the sound of his name. He had never told this woman who he was. How did you know your name? She smiled sadly. Because I've been alive long enough to recognize signs and portents. Because the chakra signature that radiates from you is unmistakable to anyone trained to notice it. And because, young man, you carry within you one of the most dangerous and precious things in existence. The Rinnegan, Naruto whispered, the knowledge coming to him not from the woman's words but from some deep understanding that had awakened within him. The woman nodded slowly. The Rinnegan. The eyes of a god. The power to reshape worlds. And you, somehow, have been reborn with it. Over the following days, as Naruto's strength slowly returned, the elderly woman, who introduced herself as Akane, provided him with mirrors and allowed him to see his own reflection for the first time since his awakening. It was a shock. His face was essentially unchanged. The same whisker marks, the same sharp blue eyes that had defined him for so long. But when he concentrated, when he allowed the new power within him to surface, his eyes transformed. The irises shifted to a deep, penetrating purple color. The pupils became a pattern of concentric rings that seemed to contain infinite depth, as though looking into them would reveal the secrets of the universe itself. The Rinnegan. He had read about it in the academy textbooks. The legendary dojutsu wielded by the sage of the 6 paths himself. The ultimate eye technique, capable of manipulating all forms of chakra and bending the very laws of reality. Nagato had possessed it. Madara had transplanted it. Pain had wielded 6 of them, but Naruto had been born with it. Reborn with it, rather. The implications were staggering. The Otsutsuki creature, Naruto said one afternoon, sitting in the monastery's garden as weak sunlight filtered through the leaves of ancient trees. It was trying to steal my Rinnegan, wasn't it? That's why it attacked. Akane nodded, sitting across from him with her ever-present knitting. The Otsutsuki clan covets such power. They view it as their rightful possession, a tool to be used in their grand plans. When the creature sensed the awakening of the Rinnegan within you, it likely moved to acquire it. So how am I alive? Naruto asked. This was the question that had plagued him since awakening. How did I survive when it was literally tearing my soul apart? Because, Akane said thoughtfully, the Rinnegan itself is partially divine in nature. The sage of the 6 paths was a bridge between the mortal and divine realms. When the Rinnegan awakens, it doesn't simply grant power, it grants a kind of resilience. A fundamental resistance to forces that would normally prove lethal to ordinary mortals. She set down her knitting and looked at him with eyes that seemed far older than her face suggested. The creature couldn't extract what it was trying to steal. The Rinnegan resisted, fighting back with an instinctive power that protected you. In that struggle, something shifted. Your soul, your body, your very essence, they were fundamentally rewritten. You are not the same person who collapsed in that forest, Naruto. You have been reborn. The word reborn stuck with him. It captured something essential about the experience. He had died. He remembered the sensation of it, that final moment as consciousness faded. But somehow, through some miracle or terrible accident, he had been given another chance. Why? He asked quietly. Why me? Why was I reborn with the Rinnegan? Akane smiled sadly. Perhaps because the world still has need of you. Perhaps because the threads of fate are not so easily severed, or perhaps simply because the universe has a sense of irony, and granting such power to someone whose greatest strength was always his compassion seemed fitting. She paused. The real question is, what will you do with this second chance? 3 days after Akane's question, Naruto experienced his first true test of the Rinnegan's power. He had been walking through the monastery's grounds, relearning how to move his body with strength again, when a child, the grandson Akane had mentioned, approached him nervously. The boy, no more than 7 years old, was carrying a kitten that was severely injured, bleeding from multiple wounds that suggested it had been attacked by a larger animal. The healers say they can help, the boy said, tears streaming down his face. They say she's too far gone. But you have chakra like nothing I've ever felt. Can you help her? Naruto looked at the dying animal, felt its life force flickering like a candle in the wind. His medical training from Sakura's teachings allowed him to assess the injuries: a punctured lung, internal bleeding, severe shock. Without immediate intervention, the kitten would be dead within minutes. He reached out with his hands, preparing to pour his own chakra into healing, when something else happened. The Rinnegan activated without his conscious command. Instead of his usual healing technique, a new ability manifested. A golden chakra emanated from Naruto's hands, and the entire space around the injured kitten seemed to shift. Reality bent slightly, and where there had been wounds, suddenly there was only unmarked fur. The internal injuries, the shock, the pain, all of it simply ceased to exist, as though it had never been. The kitten mewed softly and began purring. The boy stared in wonder, but Naruto was terrified. He pulled his hands back as though burned, watching them shake as the Rinnegan pattern faded from his eyes. What was that? Over the next several hours, locked in his room, Naruto experimented carefully with the new power. He focused on the Rinnegan, allowing it to surface, and felt the awakening of multiple distinct abilities, 6 paths of chakra manipulation, each one granting different capabilities. One allowed him to sense and manipulate gravitational forces. Another let him extract and absorb chakra with terrifying ease. A third seemed to grant him dominion over life and death. The one he had accidentally used on the kitten. The other 3 remained mysterious, locked behind veils of consciousness he hadn't yet learned to pierce. But all of them were incredibly powerful. Devastatingly so. And all of them were dangerous if revealed. The thought came to Naruto with sudden clarity. He could not let anyone know about this. It wasn't a decision born of fear, though there was certainly an element of that. Rather, it was a logical assessment of the consequences. The Otsutsuki had hunted him for the Rinnegan. If other powerful organizations, hidden villages, mercenary groups, even well-meaning shinobi governments, discovered that he had been reborn with this power, he would be hunted. Constantly. Mercilessly. They would want to study him. Control him. Use him as a weapon. But more than that, there was another concern. When he thought of Konoha, of returning to his friends and telling them the truth, he imagined the weight that knowledge would place on them. Kakashi, Sakura, the Hokage, they would spend every waking moment worried about him, protecting him, defending him against threats that would be drawn to him like moths to flame. Was that fair to them? To burden them with knowledge of such a threat? And what about his own chance at a normal life? For the first time since he could remember, Naruto considered the possibility of normalcy. He was dead to the world already. His funeral had been held. His friends were mourning. The slate was wiped clean. What if he could start over? What if he could be someone different, someone who didn't carry the entire weight of the world on his shoulders? What if he could just be normal? You've made a decision, Akane said. It wasn't a question. Naruto was sitting in the garden again, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. He had been wrestling with himself for 2 days now, ever since discovering the full scope of the Rinnegan's power. The old woman had been surprisingly patient, asking no questions, simply allowing him space to think. I can't go back, Naruto said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Akane settled herself beside him with a soft groan of old joints. And why is that? Because of what I am now, Naruto replied. The Rinnegan attracts danger. Powerful people. Powerful threats. If I go back to Konoha, I won't just be putting myself in danger, I'll be endangering everyone around me. Everyone I care about. So you would leave them to grieve forever? They're already grieving, Naruto said, and there was a hollow pain in his voice. At least this way, eventually, their pain will fade. They'll remember me fondly, and then they'll move on. They'll live their lives without the constant worry that some ancient god being is going to appear and destroy everything they love just to get to me. Akane was quiet for a long moment. And is that truly your reason? Or are you simply afraid? Naruto opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. She was right, of course. Fear was part of it. The Rinnegan had frightened him deeply when he realized its true scope. The idea of wielding such power was both exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Both, he admitted. I'm afraid of what I'll become if I don't keep this hidden. I'm afraid of the power itself. But I'm also afraid of what will happen to the people I care about if I reveal what I am. Then you have chosen to become a shadow, Akane said. A ghost haunting a world that believes you dead. Is that truly the existence you want? I don't know, Naruto whispered. But I know I can't tell them. Not yet. Not when I don't even understand what I'm capable of yet. Akane nodded slowly, and though she didn't smile, there seemed to be a sad acceptance in her expression. Very well. Then we must prepare you for the life you've chosen. You cannot simply vanish. There must be a reason you've survived. There must be a cover story, a false identity, a purpose for your continued existence that will not raise suspicion. What do you suggest? Naruto asked. Change your appearance, Akane said. Grow your hair longer if you can. Learn to use jutsu that disguise your chakra signature. Adopt a new name, a new history. You were a shinobi, trained in a specific style. Now you must become someone completely different. They spent the next hours planning. Naruto would stay at the monastery for several more weeks, continuing his physical rehabilitation. Then he would travel, using different identities, never staying in one place long enough to be noticed. He would practice controlling the Rinnegan in secret, learning its capabilities without revealing them. Most importantly, he would wear contact lenses, or fabricate them somehow, to hide the telltale purple eyes. The Rinnegan was too distinctive, too likely to be recognized by anyone with even passing knowledge of legendary jujutsu. You'll be alone, Akane warned. Traveling from place to place, never able to form lasting bonds, never able to share your burden with anyone. It will be a lonely path. I'm used to being alone, Naruto said quietly, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were a lie. He had never been alone. Even at his most isolated, as a child hated by the village, he had always had someone, Iruka, Kakashi, Sakura, eventually the entire village itself. But from this moment forward, truly alone was exactly what he would be. 2 weeks later, Naruto was finally strong enough to venture beyond the monastery grounds for extended periods. His first real test came on the road to the nearest town, when a group of bandits attempted to rob him. They were thugs, common criminals, nothing like the shinobi threats he was accustomed to. But they were also his first real opportunity to understand how much control he had over the Rinnegan now that his body had recovered. Your money, the leader demanded, a scarred man with cold eyes. Everything you have, and maybe we won't hurt you too badly. Naruto could have handled them with his left hand while blindfolded. But he had to be careful. He couldn't reveal the Rinnegan. He couldn't use any technique that would be too unusual, too distinctive. So he didn't. Instead, he fought them as the civilian he was now pretending to be. He used basic taijutsu, the kinds of movements that an untrained person with good reflexes might employ. He let them land a few hits, taking punches that would have bruised a normal human. He moved inefficiently, made mistakes. When it was over, the bandits lay unconscious but alive, defeated by someone they assumed was just lucky. No chakra had been visible. The Rinnegan had never emerged. He had won without revealing anything. But as he continued down the road, leaving the defeated bandits behind, Naruto realized something troubling. Control was harder than he had thought. The Rinnegan constantly wanted to activate. The power thrummed through his veins like a second heartbeat, pressing against his consciousness, urging him to use it. Suppressing it required constant mental effort, a tension that was exhausting. By the time he reached the town, he was sweating despite the cool afternoon temperature, and his hands were trembling slightly. That evening, in a modest inn, Naruto stood before the small mirror in his room and experimented with the contacts Akane had helped him acquire. Special lenses dyed to appear as normal dark brown eyes, subtle enough that they wouldn't draw attention but distinctive enough that they would change his appearance when combined with other alterations. He had already begun growing his hair longer, abandoning the spiky style that had defined his appearance for so many years. He had lost weight during his recovery. The reincarnation process had burned away his excess reserves of energy, so his face was leaner, more angular. Different. With the contacts in place, with his hair falling to his shoulders, with simple traveler's clothes instead of shinobi garb, he looked like a completely different person. He barely recognized himself. "This is who you are now," he whispered to his reflection. "You died. This is your second chance." The reflection stared back at him with brown eyes that were not his own, and Naruto felt a profound sense of dislocation, as though a part of himself had truly died and been replaced with something else. It was terrifying. It was also necessary. That night, Naruto dreamed. He was standing in a vast, empty space. The ground beneath his feet was white and featureless, stretching endlessly in all directions. Above, instead of a sky, there was simply more white, an infinite expanse of nothingness. In the distance, a figure appeared. As it walked toward him, Naruto recognized it with a shock that woke him momentarily from the dream's logic. It was the sage of the six paths himself, or rather, a manifestation of him, a memory perhaps, encoded within the Rinnegan that now resided in Naruto's eyes. "You have been reborn," the sage said, his voice echoing strangely in the white void. "Yes," Naruto replied, though he didn't remember choosing to speak. "But I don't understand why. You're the one who created the Rinnegan. You should know. I created the Rinnegan as a tool to bridge the divide between the mortal and divine," the sage replied. "But tools take on lives of their own sometimes. They develop purposes their creators never intended. You, Naruto Uzumaki, are such a tool now. What am I supposed to do?" Naruto asked desperately. "I have this power, but I don't understand it. I'm afraid of it. I'm afraid of what it will make me become." "Then hide it," the sage said simply. "Learn control. Let the power season you slowly instead of all at once. Many great things have been hidden before they could shine. Do not fear your own darkness, for only darkness can truly appreciate light." "But my friends will find their own paths," the sage interrupted. "As must you. You have been given a second chance at existence. Do not waste it trying to live the life you lost. Build something new. Learn something new. Become someone new." The sage was fading now, dissolving back into the white void. "Wait!" Naruto called out. "I have so many questions." "The questions will answer themselves in time," the sage's voice said, now barely audible. "Trust in the Rinnegan. Trust in yourself. And when the time comes to reveal the truth, you will know. But that time is not yet. For now, the world believes you dead. That is your greatest gift, a clean slate, a chance to choose your own path without the weight of others' expectations. Do not waste it." Naruto woke gasping, his heart pounding. For a moment, he wasn't certain if the dream had been real or simply his own subconscious working through the confusion and fear that plagued him. But as he lay in the darkness of his room, feeling the familiar thrum of the Rinnegan's power through his veins, he sensed something he hadn't noticed before. A kind of acceptance. The sage of the six paths, whether truly reaching him from across time and death, or simply a manifestation of his own inner wisdom, had offered him something precious. Permission. Permission to hide. Permission to wait. Permission to choose his own path rather than being forced along one predetermined by fate, by duty, by the weight of the world's expectations. For so long, Naruto's life had been defined by the roles others had assigned to him. The village outcast. The Jinchuriki. The hero. The bridge between enemies. All of these identities thrust upon him, defined him, constrained him. But now, with this second chance, with this new power hidden away inside him, he could be something different. He could be free. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. He rose from his bed and walked to the window, looking out at the dark landscape beyond. Somewhere out there was Konoha. Somewhere out there were his friends, mourning a ghost. Somewhere out there were threats yet unknown, hunting for a power they didn't yet realize had been reborn. And here in this small room, in this small town, was Naruto Uzumaki, or whatever he would call himself now, standing at the threshold of a new life. He placed his hand against the cool window glass, and for just a moment, allowed the Rinnegan to surface. His eyes shifted to that distinctive purple, the rings of power pulsing with possibilities. "This is my second chance," he whispered to his reflection. "I won't waste it. I'll learn. I'll grow. And when the time comes, when the world needs me again, I'll be ready." He pulled back his hand, closed his eyes, and suppressed the Rinnegan once more. The contacts would have to be adjusted tomorrow, but for tonight, alone in the darkness, he allowed himself to feel the full weight and wonder of the power he carried. Then he smiled, not the smile of the old Naruto, full of determined optimism and boundless cheerfulness, but something deeper. A smile of understanding. A smile of acceptance. His journey had begun again. Not as a shinobi, not as the hero of Konoha, not as anyone the world had ever known, but as something new. Something hidden. Something that would wait in the shadows until the time was right. A second chance. As Naruto lay back on his bed and pulled the covers over himself, he felt, for the first time since awakening, something approaching peace. Tomorrow, he would start planning his travels, his new identity, his hidden training. Tomorrow, he would begin the long road of learning to control the Rinnegan while keeping it secret from the world. But tonight, in the quiet of this small room, in a town that wouldn't remember him by morning, he could allow himself to simply be alive, changed, reborn, and finally, genuinely free. The academy was different than Naruto remembered. That wasn't quite accurate. It was the same building, the same training grounds, the same instructors and curriculum that had defined his childhood. But to Naruto, standing at the gate 3 months after leaving the monastery, it felt like stepping into an alternate reality where someone else had lived his life. His name, according to his forged documents, was Kaido. A orphan from a small village in a land of fire that had been destroyed by bandits. He had no living relatives, no one to verify his history, no connections to any major shinobi organization. The story was simple, tragic, and utterly unremarkable. Exactly the kind of background that would draw minimal attention. His appearance had been carefully crafted to be forgettable. His hair, now shoulder-length and dyed a darker shade of brown, was tied back in a simple ponytail. He wore a loose-fitting shirt and pants, deliberately choosing clothing that didn't emphasize his physique. The contacts he wore made his eyes appear to be a warm brown, the most common eye color among civilians and lower-ranking shinobi alike. He had even developed a slight slouch, a way of carrying himself that suggested a person accustomed to remaining unnoticed. The only thing that betrayed his age was his eyes, not their color, but the sharpness behind them, the way they tracked movements with an awareness that suggested training far beyond what a civilian orphan should possess. Next, the academy instructor called. Naruto, Kaido, stepped forward. He was in the testing phase, where prospective students demonstrated basic physical abilities and chakra control to determine which class they would be placed in. Around him, dozens of other children waited their turn, most of them between the ages of 12 and 15. It was strange to be younger than many of them. During his initial recovery, Naruto's body had been fundamentally altered by the Rinnegan's awakening. The reincarnation process had somehow reset aspects of his physical development, leaving him appearing to be around 13 years old. Several years younger than his actual mental age, which was now pushing 30. The instructor, a woman named Yuki with stern features and observant eyes, gestured for him to begin. "Show us your strength." Naruto approached the practice dummy and struck it with a carefully calculated punch. He used only his baseline human strength, nothing augmented by chakra, the kind of force that a strong but untrained child might produce. The dummy rocked slightly but didn't fall. "Adequate," Yuki noted, making marks on her clipboard. Chakra control test. This was the moment that required the most careful attention. Chakra control was measured by having the student climb a tree using only chakra, without using hands or feet. It was a standard academy exercise designed to teach young shinobi to regulate their energy output. For someone with the Rinnegan, it would be ridiculously easy, almost impossible not to excel at, which was exactly why Naruto had to deliberately fail. He approached the designated training tree and placed his hands on the bark. He gathered his chakra carefully, reducing it to a fraction of what he could actually command. It was like trying to pour from a full cup into a thimble. Keeping the power contained required constant mental effort. He pushed off and ran up the tree's trunk, managing to go about 3 meters before his control slipped and he fell back to the ground with a thump that was mostly performed. Per chakra control, Yuki observed. You'll be in Class C, alongside others with similar aptitude. Report to Classroom 3 starting tomorrow at dawn. Class C was the lowest tier, reserved for students with minimal natural talent or potential. It was exactly where Naruto needed to be, far enough from any instructors who might notice inconsistencies, far enough from advanced training that would make hiding his abilities difficult. As he walked away from the testing ground, Naruto felt the familiar strain of suppressing his chakra signature. The Rinnegan constantly pushed against his mental barriers, wanting to activate, wanting to demonstrate its true power. It was like holding back a flood with a paper dam. Controlling it required a conscious effort every waking moment. The academy dormitory was crowded and chaotic, filled with the noise and energy of hundreds of young people excited to begin their ninja training. Naruto found himself assigned to a room with 3 other students in Class C. A girl named Hana who dreamed of becoming a tracker, a boy named Daichi who wanted to master earth release techniques, and another boy named Riku who had essentially no idea why he was even here and seemed perpetually confused about which classroom he was supposed to be in. They were all thoroughly ordinary. Exactly the kind of people Naruto needed to surround himself with. So where are you from, Kaido? Hana asked on the first night, as they prepared their sleeping mats. A small village north of here, Naruto replied, sticking to his memorized cover story. It was destroyed about a year ago. I was away training with a hunter when it happened, so I survived. It was a lie constructed from half-truths. He had indeed been away from his home, though not in the way he was implying, and his home had been destroyed in a manner of speaking, though the destruction was more metaphorical than literal. That's tragic, Hana said sympathetically. Do you still have family? No, Naruto said, and this was true. I'm alone. The conversation moved on, and Naruto was able to return to his internal struggle of maintaining the carefully constructed facade of normalcy. The next morning brought his first real test. The academy instructors began with basic conditioning, running, stretching, simple martial arts forms. Naruto had to deliberately perform poorly in ways that wouldn't be suspiciously dramatic. He couldn't be the fastest or strongest, that would draw attention. But he also couldn't be so weak that he'd be suspected of sandbagging. There was a narrow band of mediocre with slight promise that he had to maintain. It was exhausting. By the time noon arrived, Naruto was more mentally fatigued than he would have been from an actual high-intensity workout. Controlling his power, managing his pace, ensuring his performance remained consistently unremarkable, these required constant vigilance. During lunch, as he sat with his roommates in the mess hall, Naruto noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the middle tier training yard, visible through the cafeteria windows, was a face he recognized. Kakashi. His former teacher was overseeing a training exercise for Class A students, and even from this distance, Naruto could sense the distinctive chakra signature he had known for so long. The copy ninja had changed slightly in the months since Naruto's death. He seemed more withdrawn, moving with less of his usual casual grace. But it was unmistakably him. Naruto quickly turned away, terrified that even his glance might somehow be noticed. He focused intently on his rice bowl, using every bit of his control to keep his chakra from flaring in response to the shock of recognition. Kakashi was here. At the academy. Teaching. It made sense, of course. The village would need instructors, and Kakashi was one of the most skilled shinobi in Konoha. But the presence of his former teacher in the same building filled Naruto with a complicated tangle of emotions. The desire to reveal himself, to rush across the cafeteria and simply prove that he was alive, warred with the knowledge that such an action would ruin everything he had built. Are you okay? Hana asked, noticing his sudden tension. You look pale. Just thought I saw someone I knew, Naruto managed. But it was probably someone else. It was a lie. And it was the first of many he would tell. 3 weeks into his time at the academy, Naruto's carefully maintained control nearly shattered. It happened during a sparring match in the training yard. The Class C students were being taught basic taijutsu, with partners assigned randomly for practice bouts. Naruto's opponent was a boy named Jinro, a student with a slight natural advantage in strength but poor fundamentals. The match should have been easy to throw convincingly, but Jinro made a critical mistake. During an exchange, he attempted a technique that left his side completely exposed. It was the kind of opening that a trained shinobi would instinctively punish. Naruto's body responded on pure instinct, drawing on years of experience. He was about to deliver a devastating counter-strike when he caught himself, but not quickly enough. His hand moved with unnatural speed, blur-fast in a way that no Class C student should be capable of. The punch was pulled at the last moment, becoming merely a light tap instead of the powerful strike it had been meant to be. But the acceleration was visible to everyone watching. For a split second, there was absolute silence in the training yard. All eyes turned toward him. Naruto felt his heart hammering in his chest. The Rinnegan was pressing against his consciousness, activated by adrenaline and instinct, demanding to emerge and deal with the perceived threat. He forced it back down with an effort that made sweat bead on his forehead. "Lucky," he said, making his voice sound surprised and embarrassed. "I was faster than I thought. Got excited, I guess." It was the worst possible explanation, but it was what he could come up with in the moment. The instructor, a middle-aged man named Takuro, frowned slightly. He walked over and observed Naruto with an intensity that made the boy's entire body tense. "Do it again," Takuro said. "That movement. Show me." I'm not sure I can replicate it," Naruto said, deliberately making his voice uncertain. It was just a moment of good timing. Takuro studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But I'll be watching you, Kaido. Class C students don't usually move like that." The instructor walked away, but the damage was done. Naruto had attracted the kind of attention he absolutely could not afford. One observant instructor was one too many. That night, Naruto couldn't sleep. He lay on his mat, staring at the ceiling of the dormitory room, listening to the soft breathing of his roommates, and spiraled into panic. What if Takuro reported him? What if the academy leadership became suspicious? What if they investigated his background and discovered the forgeries? What if they somehow sensed the Rinnegan's presence, and connected him to reports of Naruto Uzumaki's death? Every scenario led to the same conclusion: discovery. Around midnight, unable to tolerate the confinement of the dormitory any longer, Naruto slipped out of the building and made his way to a secluded area of the academy grounds, an abandoned training yard on the eastern edge of the property that was rarely used. There, alone in the darkness, he finally allowed himself to break. The Rinnegan erupted from his eyes, the purple light illuminating the night like a lantern. His chakra flared outward, a wave of power that sent leaves spiraling through the air and cracked the stone of the training ground beneath his feet. This was a mistake, he whispered harshly to himself. Coming here was a mistake. I'm going to be discovered. I'm going to be hunted. I should never have. Should never have what? A voice asked from the shadows. Naruto spun around, his hands immediately raised in a combat stance. The Rinnegan flared brighter, his instinctive response to a potential threat, before he forced himself to control it. A figure emerged from the darkness, a woman perhaps in her early 20s, with dark hair and eyes that held an unsettling depth. She wore the standard Konoha shinobi uniform, and her posture suggested extensive training. "You," she said, eyes widening as she recognized him. "The Rinnegan. That's your..." Naruto didn't let her finish. In one fluid motion, he drew on the Rinnegan's power, and used the Bansho Tenin, the attractive force. The technique yanked the woman forward through the air with such force that she lost her breath. He caught her as she stumbled, his hand closing around her throat with just enough pressure to be threatening. "If you scream," he said, his voice low and cold in a way that Naruto Uzumaki would never have sounded, "I will kill you." The woman's eyes were wide with fear, and for a moment, Naruto felt a rush of shame. He was hurting someone innocent, someone who had done nothing but stumble upon his secret. But the survival instinct was stronger than the shame. "I don't want to hurt you," he continued, releasing her throat but keeping his hands ready to subdue her again if necessary. But you can't tell anyone what you saw. You can't report me. You can't mention the Rinnegan to anyone. If you do, people will come for me. Dangerous people. And I will have no choice but to eliminate anyone who becomes a threat. He could see the calculation in her eyes. She was assessing whether he meant it, whether this boy with the legendary dojutsu was truly capable of cold-blooded murder. He was. And somehow, she sensed that. Who are you? She asked quietly. Someone who was given a second chance, Naruto replied. Someone who wants to be left alone. Will you do that? Will you keep my secret? The woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Okay. I won't tell anyone. Good, Naruto said. Now tell me your name. If you break your word, I'll know who to find. Mizuki, the woman said. My name is Mizuki. And I won't tell anyone. I promise. Naruto studied her for another moment, then released her completely. She stumbled backward, rubbing at her throat where his fingers had left marks. Go, he said. Return to your duties. Forget you saw me. Mizuki didn't need to be told twice. She fled back toward the main academy buildings, and Naruto was left alone again in the darkness. But he wasn't truly alone anymore. His secret had been discovered. Naruto didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He lay in his dormitory mat, listening to every sound, expecting at any moment for Anbu to arrive and arrest him. But the night passed quietly, and morning came without incident. Throughout the next day, as he attended classes and tried to maintain his facade of normalcy, Naruto waited for the other shoe to drop. He expected Mizuki to betray him, to report him to the Hokage or the academy leadership. It never happened. That evening, after training had ended and the other Class C students had returned to their dormitory, Naruto found a note slipped under his mat. Meet me at the old training yard again. Midnight. Come alone. It could be a trap. It probably was a trap. But Naruto had killed her chances of escaping if he moved quickly enough, so he went. Mizuki was waiting when he arrived, this time without any obvious weapons. She held her hands open and visible, a gesture of non-aggression. I've been thinking about what I saw, she said without preamble. About who you must be. The Rinnegan. That kind of power, Reborn, you have to be connected to something massive. Something important. Stay away from me, Naruto said coldly. That's the only way you stay safe. That's the thing, Mizuki replied. I don't think I stay safe either way. If I tell people about the Rinnegan, I'm a loose end who might talk again. If I don't tell people, I'm a person who knows a dangerous secret, and could become a liability. So either way, I'm at risk. Naruto opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. She was right. What do you want? He asked finally. Information, Mizuki said. Tell me the truth about who you are. Where the Rinnegan came from. Why you're hiding at the academy instead of using that power to save the world or take over the world or whatever it is people with legendary dojutsu usually do. And if I don't, then I'll still keep your secret, Mizuki said. Because I'm not going to throw away my life just to satisfy my curiosity. But it would be nice to know what I'm risking my life to protect. Naruto studied her carefully. There was something genuine in her expression, something that suggested she actually meant what she was saying. But he had learned that such things could be deceiving. I'll tell you part of the truth, he said finally. But not all of it. And only because you've given me no real choice. Over the next hour, Naruto explained a carefully edited version of his circumstances. He told her that he had been a shinobi who had died in battle, and that through some twist of fate, or divine intervention, he had been reborn with the Rinnegan. He explained that revealing his existence would draw dangerous forces to Konoha, which was why he had chosen to hide his identity and attend the academy under a false name. He didn't tell her who he had been before. He didn't explain the Otsutsuki. He didn't reveal the true scope of the Rinnegan's power, but he gave her enough truth that she could understand the basic situation. So you're not a villain, Mizuki said when he finished. You're just trying to protect people by hiding. Yes, Naruto confirmed. That's remarkably selfless for someone with godlike power, Mizuki observed. I half expected you to be some kind of megalomaniac. I almost was, Naruto admitted. That's part of why I need to hide. The Rinnegan, it has a way of corrupting the people who wield it. Controlling their thoughts, pushing them toward domination and conquest. The only way to resist that is to suppress it, to keep it contained, to remind myself regularly of who I was before it awakened. Mizuki nodded slowly. So what happens now? Do you kill me to keep me quiet? No, Naruto said. If you've been hiding this secret for this long without revealing it, you're either incredibly loyal or incredibly afraid. Either way, I don't think you're going to betray me. I could still change my mind, Mizuki pointed out. You could, Naruto agreed. But if you were going to do that, you would have already done it. You wouldn't have waited this long, and you wouldn't have met me again tonight. Mizuki smiled slightly. Fair point. So what's your plan? Stay at the academy forever? Pretend to be this average student named Kaido while you secretly learn to control God Tier power? Something like that, Naruto said. I'll graduate with my class. I'll become a genin. I'll go on missions with a team, and I'll try to be useful without revealing my true capabilities. Eventually, I'll find a way to leave the village and live somewhere else, somewhere I can train in peace. That sounds incredibly lonely, Mizuki said. It will be, Naruto acknowledged. But it's better than the alternative. For the next 2 months, Naruto maintained his precarious balance between his secret identity and his hidden power. Mizuki kept his secret, and in doing so, became perhaps the closest thing Naruto had to a friend in this new life. She never pushed him for more information, never attempted to use his secret as leverage. She simply acknowledged what she knew and acted as though nothing had changed. It helped, in a small way, to have someone else aware of the truth. But the strain of constant suppression was taking its toll. The Rinnegan was not meant to be hidden. Like its wielder, it had a nature that pushed toward revelation and action. Keeping it locked away inside Naruto's mind required a constant mental fortitude that exhausted him. His grades remained deliberately mediocre, but his instructors began to notice that he was unusually pale, often appeared tired, and sometimes seemed to be struggling with concentration. Takuro, the instructor who had noticed his earlier moment of superior speed, continued to watch him carefully. The man never said anything directly, but Naruto could feel his eyes on him during training exercises, assessing, questioning. The breakthrough, or breakdown, came during a supervised mission. The academy regularly sent teams of young students on low-risk missions to give them practical experience. Naruto's team, composed of himself, Hana, and a third student named Koji, had been assigned to deliver a package to a nearby village. It was a simple task. Dangerous only if something went wrong. Something went wrong. They encountered bandits on the road, the same group, coincidentally, that had tried to rob Naruto months earlier when he was still recovering at the monastery. The leader, the scarred man with cold eyes, recognized him immediately. You, the man said, his hand going to his weapon. The bastard who cost me 3 good men. Naruto's heart sank. He had hoped that encounter would be forgotten, but the bandit leader clearly had a good memory for grudges. What happened next occurred at the speed of panic. The bandits attacked, and for a moment, Naruto's control slipped. Months of suppression, exhaustion from constant vigilance, the instinct to protect his teammates, it all combined to crack his facade. The Rinnegan activated. Purple light erupted from his eyes, illuminating the forest around them. Before he could fully suppress it again, he had already used the Shinra Tensei, the repelling force, to send all the bandits flying backward with devastating force. The air seemed to shatter around them. Trees creaked and groaned. The ground rippled as though responding to some titanic impact. When the dust settled, all the bandits were unconscious or dead, and Naruto was staring at the horrified faces of his teammates. Kaido, Hana said slowly, "What the hell was that?" The jig, as they said, was up. Naruto could try to lie. He could try to explain it away as some kind of hidden ability. But Hana had seen the Rinnegan. She had seen the distinctive pattern of the legendary dojutsu, and there was no way to unsee that. "We need to return to the village," Naruto said quietly. Now, the walk back to Konoha was the longest of his life. Hana and Koji whispered to each other constantly, casting fearful glances back at Naruto. They clearly suspected who he might be, though they didn't voice it. The presence of the Rinnegan had connected to some half-remembered lesson about legendary powers and ancient shinobi. When they arrived at the academy gates and reported to the instructor overseeing their return, the news spread like wildfire. Within an hour, Naruto was being escorted to the office of the academy's headmaster. Within 2 hours he was standing face to face with Kakashi. The office was sparse and professional, decorated with the kind of minimalist aesthetic that Kakashi had always preferred. The copy ninja stood by the window, his visible eye fixed on Naruto with an intensity that was almost painful. "Your story," Kakashi said, not bothering with pleasantries, "is that you're an orphan named Kaido who survived a bandit attack. You have forged documents provided by—" "I'm not going to tell you where they came from," Naruto interrupted. "And I'm not going to explain the Rinnegan." "You're going to do both," Kakashi said calmly. "Or you're going to be imprisoned as a security threat to the village. Those are your options." Naruto met his former teacher's gaze steadily. This was the moment he had been dreading since choosing to hide. He had always known it would come eventually. He just hadn't expected it to happen so soon, or under such circumstances. "If I tell you who I am," Naruto said carefully, "you'll report it to the Hokage. The village leadership will interrogate me. They'll want to study the Rinnegan. They'll want to understand where it came from and how I obtained it. And within days, every hidden village will know that I'm alive. Within weeks, I'll be hunted by every organization with the resources to do so." "Yes," Kakashi said. "That's likely. Then you understand why I can't tell you." "I understand your reasoning," Kakashi corrected. "What I don't understand is why you're here at all. Why attend the academy? Why not simply leave the village and train in isolation?" It was a fair question. And Naruto realized, as he considered his answer, that he didn't fully understand his own motivation. Why had he come to the academy? Why had he subjected himself to the constant stress of hiding his power in a place where the stakes of discovery were so high? "Because," Naruto said slowly, "I needed to see if I could still be human. If I could exist among people and be accepted for who I was pretending to be, without the power defining me. I needed to know if I could be something other than the Rinnegan." Kakashi was quiet for a moment. Then he moved away from the window and sat behind his desk, gesturing for Naruto to take a seat. "Tell me," Kakashi said, "what happened to you? How did you survive?" And because Naruto was tired, so deeply tired of carrying this secret alone, and because Kakashi had been his teacher and mentor for so long that the trust was still there underneath the deception, he told him. He explained the battle, the Otsutsuki, the sensation of death, the miraculous awakening with the Rinnegan, the decision to hide and attempt a normal life, the constant strain of suppression, the fear of discovery. He didn't reveal everything. He still held back information about the true scope of the Rinnegan's power, and he refused to explain the Otsutsuki's full nature or how the Rinnegan had actually come to him. But he gave Kakashi the broad strokes of the truth. When he finished, Kakashi sat back in his chair, his visible eye closing in what looked like exhaustion. "Do you have any idea how much we suffered when you died?" Kakashi asked quietly. "How much the village grieved?" "Yes," Naruto said. "That's why I couldn't go back." "Selfish," Kakashi said, but there was no anger in the word, only a statement of fact. "Yes," Naruto agreed. "And yet..." Kakashi opened his eye again and looked at Naruto with an expression the boy couldn't quite read. "And yet, I almost understand. The burden you're carrying, it's not something to be shared lightly. So what happens now?" Naruto asked. Kakashi stood and walked to the door. "Now," he said, "we go speak with the Hokage. And you're going to have to make a choice. You can either trust us with your secret, or you can attempt to flee, knowing that the entire village will be hunting you. There is no third option." The Hokage's office was on the highest floor of the administrative building, overlooking the entire village of Konoha. Naruto had never been inside it during his previous life. He had always been too much of an outsider for such formal meetings, but somehow it felt familiar. The current Hokage was a man in his 50s named Tsunade's successor, a capable administrator named Hyuga who had taken the role in the years following the fourth's death. He looked up from his paperwork as Kakashi escorted Naruto inside, and his expression shifted from mild curiosity to profound shock. "The Rinnegan," Hyuga said simply. "Yes," Naruto confirmed, dropping his contacts on the desk to make the point undeniable. What followed was an interrogation that lasted until late into the evening. Hyuga asked questions about everything: where the Rinnegan came from, How Naruto had hidden it so effectively, whether he posed a threat to the village, whether he was being controlled by anyone, whether the dojutsu was permanent or temporary, whether he could teach others to manifest it. To most of these questions, Naruto gave honest answers. To others, particularly anything involving the Otsutsuki or the true extent of the Rinnegan's power, he remained deliberately vague. I need to think about this, Hyuga said finally, after hours of back and forth. The Rinnegan is not something I can simply ignore or hide away, but neither can I allow it to become public knowledge without causing massive upheaval. In the meantime, you're confined to quarters. Guards will be posted outside your room. You will not leave the academy grounds without explicit permission. For how long? Naruto asked. For as long as it takes, Hyuga replied. Dismissed. The next 3 days were some of the longest of Naruto's new life. He was confined to a small room with nothing but a bed, a window, and his own thoughts. Guards stood outside the door constantly, ninja who watched him with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. The strain of being truly imprisoned, after so long pretending to be free while hiding his power, was almost unbearable. But there were moments of relief. Mizuki visited him on the second day, slipping past the guards with a skill that suggested she had more training than any Class C student should have. I heard what happened, she said quietly. I'm sorry. This is my fault for pushing you to explain anything. No, Naruto said. This was inevitable. I was always going to be discovered. The only question was when. What will they do to you? Mizuki asked. I don't know, Naruto admitted. Either they'll let me go, or they'll try to control me, or they'll try to kill me. One of those 3 outcomes seems most likely. Kakashi visited him on the 3rd day. The Hokage has made a decision, he said, without any preamble. You're to be placed under my direct supervision. You'll be removed from the academy and instead trained privately, away from the general student population. Your official cover story will be that you're a student with unusual aptitude who requires individual instruction. And my friends? Naruto asked. Hana and Koji? What about them? They'll be debriefed and made to sign documents regarding village security. They won't be hurt, but they won't be speaking about what they saw, Kakashi said. The Rinnegan is now classified information at the highest level. Outside of the Hokage, myself, a few ANBU members, and now you, no one knows about it. Mizuki knows, Naruto said. Mizuki will also be brought in and debriefed, Kakashi confirmed. She won't be a threat. Naruto nodded slowly, processing this information. In a way, having his secret revealed to the village leadership was a relief. The constant stress of hiding was gone, replaced by a different kind of stress, the stress of being known, studied, and carefully managed. There's one more thing, Kakashi said, his tone shifting to something softer. The Hokage wants you to tell us who you were before the Rinnegan awakened, because I'm going to guess that Kaido is not your real name. Naruto stared at his former teacher for a long moment. Then he smiled, a genuine smile, not the calculated expression of a boy pretending to be someone he wasn't. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said. I died 3 months ago in a battle at the Valley of the End. And apparently, I'm not done dying yet. Kakashi's visible eye widened, and for the first time since Naruto's confession began, his former teacher's carefully maintained composure cracked. Naruto, Kakashi breathed, and something that had been locked away inside Naruto since his reincarnation finally released. He began to cry, deep, racking sobs of relief and exhaustion and grief, all the emotions he had been forcing down while maintaining his facade of Kaido. For months, he had been alone with a secret that was slowly crushing him. And now, finally, someone knew the truth. He was no longer completely alone in the darkness. He was no longer completely hidden. The second chance at life was becoming something more complicated than he had ever imagined, not the clean slate he had hoped for, but something messy, something that would require him to re-engage with the world and the people in it. And as terrifying as that prospect was, there was something almost like hope in it too. The private training grounds were located on the eastern edge of Konoha, far removed from the main village and hidden behind layers of natural forest and reinforced barriers. It was here that Kakashi brought Naruto 3 days after his revelation to the Hokage, where the true nature of his second life would begin to take shape. The facility itself was modest, a series of small buildings connected by covered walkways, with multiple training yards of varying specialization. But what impressed Naruto most was the security. NBU seals were carved into every tree, barrier jutsu marked the perimeter at regular intervals, and at least 4 hidden sentries watched the area at any given time. The Hokage takes the Rinnegan very seriously, Kakashi explained as he led Naruto through the grounds. This location was originally built for training village leadership. Now it's been repurposed for your exclusive use. Naruto wanted to feel special at this revelation. Instead, he felt trapped. How long will I be confined here? He asked, watching a group of ANBU move through the forest canopy above. That depends on several factors, Kakashi replied. First, we need to conduct thorough tests of the Rinnegan's capabilities. Second, we need to determine whether the power is a threat to you or to the village. And third, we need to establish protocols for managing your abilities in a way that doesn't draw external attention. And if you determine it's too much of a threat? Kakashi didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was carefully neutral. Then other measures will be considered. The implication was clear. If the village deemed Naruto too dangerous to manage, they would eliminate him. It wasn't an unfair concern. Naruto understood the logic perfectly. A person wielding the Rinnegan represented an existential threat to any nation that didn't control him. But understanding the logic and accepting it were two different things. The first week of his confinement was consumed with preliminary examinations. Medical Nin tested his physical parameters, drew blood samples, and analyzed his chakra composition. They were respectful but thorough, checking everything from his healing factor to his resistance to various poisons. The tests were non-invasive, but they reinforced Naruto's status as something to be studied rather than someone to be trusted. Kakashi conducted more practical assessments, asking Naruto to demonstrate various Rinnegan abilities in controlled settings. The training yard was cleared, observation posts were established, and safety barriers were erected before Kakashi even allowed Naruto to manifest the dojutsu. Show me the gravity techniques, Kakashi instructed during one session. Naruto focused his chakra and activated the Rinnegan. The purple eyes emerged, rings of power pulsing with dormant energy. He felt the gravitational forces respond to his will, pressing downward like an invisible weight. With careful control that had taken months to develop, he activated the Shinra Tensei. The repelling force radiated outward from his body in a controlled wave, pushing against the specially reinforced training barriers. The stone groaned but held, leaving visible cracks in its surface. Again, Kakashi said. But with half the force. Naruto complied, and this time the barriers remained undamaged. He continued the exercise for several hours, learning to modulate the power, to extend and compress its range, to direct it with precision rather than as a blunt instrument. By the time Kakashi called an end to the training, Naruto was sweating heavily, and his head pounded with the strain of such intense focus. You're learning control, Kakashi observed as they walked back to the main buildings. Better than I would have expected, given that you've only had a few months to work with this power. Your training before the Rinnegan manifested must have been exceptional. It was an opening for Naruto to explain his past, to bridge the gap between who he had been and who he was now. But he remained silent, and Kakashi didn't push. On the 10th day of his confinement, everything changed. Naruto was in the library section of the facility, reading through historical records of Rinnegan wielders, when he sensed it. A presence in the forest surrounding the grounds, vast and alien and deeply wrong. It was the same sensation he had felt just before the Otsutsuki attacked him months ago. Kakashi, he called out, his voice tight with urgency. We have a problem. His former teacher appeared within seconds, moving with the speed of someone who had been expecting something like this. What? There's something out there, Naruto said, pointing toward the northern edge of the compound. A presence. It's like the thing that killed me before. An Otsutsuki. Kakashi's eye widened. He immediately activated a communication seal on the wall, sending a message to the ANBU guards. Within moments, the facility went into lockdown, barriers flaring to life, guards mobilizing, contingency protocols activating. Describe it, Kakashi demanded, moving to position himself between Naruto and the direction of the threat. I can't see it, Naruto said, his Rinnegan already activating as he extended his sensory range. But I can feel it. It's watching us. like a predator observing prey. The Rinnegan granted him a form of sensory perception that was entirely unique to the dojutsu, a kind of gravitational awareness that let him detect disturbances in the space around him. The presence he was sensing was enormous, a gravity well of power that moved through the forest with casual inevitability. For a moment, nothing happened. The presence lingered at the edge of the barrier, probing it like a serpent testing a cage. Then it withdrew. The sensation faded gradually, the presence retreating deeper into the forest until it was completely gone. "It's gone," Naruto said, but the relief he felt was short-lived. Within an hour, the facility was overrun with high-ranking shinobi. The Hokage himself arrived, accompanied by the village's most senior strategists and combat specialists. They gathered in a conference room, and Naruto found himself at the center of an intense interrogation. "You're certain it was an Otsutsuki?" Hyuga asked, his tone suggesting he was asking a question he already knew the answer to. "Yes," Naruto confirmed. "The presence felt exactly like the one that attacked me before. Alien. Ancient. Wrong in a way that normal chakra isn't. And it was specifically targeting this location?" "No," Naruto said, and this was the detail that troubled him most. "It felt accidental. Like it sensed something that drew its attention, but it wasn't specifically searching for me or this facility." Kakashi and the Hokage exchanged glances that suggested they understood the implication better than Naruto did. "It sensed the Rinnegan," Hyuga said quietly. "An Otsutsuki can detect the dojutsu across vast distances. The moment you began manifesting it here at the facility, you created a beacon that potentially attracted every Otsutsuki remnant in this region of the world." The words hit Naruto like a physical blow. His time in confinement, the very place designed to keep him and the village safe, had potentially put everyone at risk. By training openly with the Rinnegan, by allowing his power to radiate outward without suppression, he had done exactly what he had feared most, brought danger down upon innocent people. "We need to relocate him," one of the strategists said. "Move him to a more remote location, somewhere in the mountains or deep forest where external detection would be harder, and completely waste the investment we've made in understanding the Rinnegan?" Another countered. "He's finally beginning to develop control. Moving him would set that progress back months. Unless we suppress the Rinnegan entirely," a third voice suggested. "There are sealing techniques that could lock the power away, prevent it from radiating outward." "No." Naruto stood up, his voice cutting through the debate. All eyes turned toward him. "Suppressing the Rinnegan isn't the answer. It's what caused this problem in the first place." "Explain," Hyuga said, gesturing for the others to remain silent. "The Rinnegan wants to be used," Naruto said carefully, choosing his words with precision. "Keeping it locked away, constantly pushing it down, that creates a kind of pressure, like a dam holding back water. The harder you push it down, the more desperately it wants to emerge. And when it does emerge, the release is violent and uncontrolled." He thought back to the night when Mizuki had discovered him, when the Rinnegan had flared in panic. He thought back to the mission with Hana and Koji, when suppression had cracked and released devastating force. "What are you suggesting?" Hyuga asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I need to be separated from the village," Naruto said. "Completely. I can't be trained here, and I can't stay here. The Rinnegan's power needs space to develop naturally, without the constraint of hiding or suppressing. The only way to prevent it from becoming a beacon is to accept that it will always be detectable to Otsutsuki, and to minimize the area of civilian population that's affected." "You're describing exile," Kakashi said quietly. "Yes," Naruto confirmed. "I came to the village hoping for a normal life. But there is no normal for me. The kindest thing I can do for Konoha is to leave it." There was silence in the conference room. Hyuga leaned back in his chair, considering Naruto's words with the measured patience of someone used to making difficult decisions. "We'll discuss this with the full council," Hyuga said finally. "In the meantime, you're confined to the innermost facilities. The Rinnegan is to be kept suppressed at all times unless explicitly authorized by myself or Kakashi. We'll post additional guards and reinforce the barriers." "And Naruto?" The Hokage paused, meeting his eyes directly. "Thank you for your honesty. It may well have saved lives." The waiting was worse than the confinement. Over the next 3 days, while the village council debated Naruto's fate, He was locked in the most heavily secured section of the facility with instructions to suppress the Rinnegan completely. It was torture of a special kind, the dojitsu pressing against his consciousness constantly, demanding to be used, to be released, to be allowed to grow. The suppression headaches began almost immediately. Kakashi noticed during one of his visits, seeing Naruto clutching his head, eyes squeezed shut against the pain. "This is why exile is the right choice," Naruto said, his voice tight. "I can't suppress this forever. It's not something that can be contained indefinitely." "The council won't approve exile," Kakashi replied. "They'll try to find another way first. Sealing, relocation, perhaps working with other villages to distribute the threat." "Those are all mistakes," Naruto interrupted. "They don't understand what they're dealing with. The Rinnegan isn't just power, Kakashi. It's something alive. Something with its own nature and will. You can't seal it or contain it any more than you can seal nature itself." Kakashi sat beside him, his posture suggesting a level of exhaustion that went beyond the physical. "Do you remember," he asked quietly, "the time I told you that you were the same as Sasuke? That you shared his fate?" "Yes," Naruto said. "You said we were both destined to be alone." "I was wrong about many things," Kakashi continued. "I was wrong about him. And I'm afraid I might be wrong about you too. But Naruto, loneliness. It's something I've become very familiar with. It's a path I wouldn't wish on anyone. Better loneliness than putting others at risk," Naruto said. "Is it?" Kakashi asked. "I'm not certain anymore." They sat in silence, and Naruto found himself leaning toward his former teacher, seeking comfort in the familiar presence. For a moment, the weight of the world seemed slightly lighter. On the evening of the third day, as Naruto was struggling with another suppression headache, an ANBU operative entered the facility with urgent news. Kakashi was summoned immediately, and Naruto could hear their conversation through the door. Low, tense, carried in urgent tones. "Reports from the northern border. Unusual activity in the mountains. Can't be confirmed, but the pattern matches what we discussed regarding Otsutsuki movements. Gather a team," Kakashi said. "I want reconnaissance within the hour." The conversation ended, and Kakashi appeared in Naruto's room minutes later. "There may be a larger situation developing," he said without preamble. "Scouts have reported strange phenomena in the mountains north of the village, distortions in natural chakra, unusual weather patterns, and some reports of humanoid figures that don't match any known shinobi or wildlife." "Otsutsuki," Naruto said immediately. "Possibly," Kakashi confirmed. "Or possibly something else. The point is, if there is a genuine threat emerging outside the village, then your presence here becomes less critical than addressing that threat directly. You're saying they might authorize my exile after all. Or they might have a different idea," Kakashi said. "Giving you a mission outside the village boundaries, in a combat capacity, where using the Rinnegan would be not just acceptable but necessary." Naruto understood the subtle distinction Kakashi was making. The council might frame it as a temporary mission rather than permanent exile. It would allow him to leave the village without technically abandoning his position, and it would give him the freedom to manifest his power without constant suppression. It was, in its way, a compromise that served everyone's interests. "When do I leave?" Naruto asked. "If the council approves, and I suspect they will, you leave at dawn tomorrow," Kakashi said. "Myself, 2 other shinobi, and you will investigate the disturbances in the northern mountains. We'll pose as a research team studying unusual chakra phenomena. If we encounter Otsutsuki, we'll assess the threat and determine whether direct action is warranted or if we need to report back to the village. And if the threat is too large, then we retreat and call in reinforcements," Kakashi said. "But I suspect that's unlikely. If there were a major Otsutsuki incursion, we would have sensed it already." That night, Naruto couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his cot, staring out the small window at the stars, contemplating the path that had led him here. From reincarnation to exile in the span of 3 months. From the hidden orphan boy Kaido back to Naruto Uzumaki, the legendary user of the Rinnegan. Around midnight there was a soft sound at his door. Naruto looked up, expecting an ANBU guard or perhaps Kakashi checking on him. Instead, Mizuki slipped inside, moving with careful stealth. "They're going to let you leave," she said without preamble. "I overheard the council discussing it. They're framing it as a special mission, but it's really exile dressed up in more pleasant language. How did you get past the guards? Naruto asked. I have my ways, Mizuki replied with a slight smile. The point is, I wanted to see you before you go. To tell you something. She moved closer, sitting beside him at the window. In the starlight, Naruto could see that her expression was troubled. You're not the first, she said quietly. You're not the first person with a legendary dojutsu to struggle with what you're struggling with. I know that because my family has records. Old records. Records that the village doesn't officially acknowledge. What kind of records? Naruto asked carefully. Records of Otsutsuki visitors, Mizuki said. Not invasions, exactly. More like encounters. Periods in history when beings from beyond this world made contact with shinobi. Some of those encounters resulted in the emergence of powerful dojutsu. Others resulted in complications. She pulled a small scroll from her pocket and handed it to him. This is from my family's archive. It documents 3 instances where individuals manifested powers similar to the Rinnegan. What happened to them? How they coped. Naruto carefully opened the scroll, reading through the text. The language was ancient, the handwriting archaic, but the message was clear. There had been other Rinnegan users throughout history. Some had lived in isolation. Others had tried to integrate with society. One had attempted to use the power to reshape the world. None of them had ended well. Why are you showing me this? Naruto asked. Because you need to understand that your struggle isn't unique, Mizuki replied. And because there might be a way forward that the council hasn't considered. These records suggest that Rinnegan power can be shared. Distributed. Not in the sense of giving others the dojutsu, but in the sense of creating a network of people who understand and can help manage the bearer. You're suggesting a conspiracy. I'm suggesting a support network, Mizuki corrected gently. You don't have to carry this alone. Not if you don't want to. Naruto looked at the scroll, then back at Mizuki. If the council discovered that you were sharing classified information, they won't, Mizuki said with certainty. Because you won't tell them. And because when you leave tomorrow, you'll need to know that someone in this village understands what you're going through. That someone cares enough to give you resources and support, even at a distance. Thank you, Naruto said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. Don't thank me yet, Mizuki said. First, you need to survive whatever's waiting for you in those mountains. Then, when you come back, and you will come back, because you're not the type to abandon people you care about forever, we can talk about building that network. She rose to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, she said, I don't think you're a monster. I think you're someone who's been forced to carry too much weight for too long. Maybe it's time to let someone help you carry it. After she was gone, Naruto sat with the scroll for hours, reading through the historical accounts of other Rinnegan users, finding both comfort and caution in their stories. The mission briefing took place just before dawn. Kakashi introduced Naruto to the 2 other shinobi who would be accompanying them, a woman named Reiko, a sensor-type specialist with expertise in detecting unusual chakra patterns, and a man named Tetsu, a combat-focused shinobi with a reputation for tactical excellence. Neither of them knew Naruto's true nature. As far as they were concerned, he was a civilian with some shinobi training who had been selected to help investigate the northern disturbances because of his unique perspective and abilities. If they suspected anything else, they kept it to themselves. The journey to the northern mountains took 2 days of travel through increasingly wild terrain. As they moved further from the village, Naruto could feel the restrictions around him loosening. The constant suppression of the Rinnegan became less critical, and he allowed himself to let the power rise slightly, just enough to maintain active sensation without fully manifesting the dojutsu. It was a relief beyond measure. On the evening of the 2nd day, as they camped in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest, Kakashi drew Naruto aside for a private conversation. Tomorrow we'll reach the area where the disturbances were reported, Kakashi said. From that point forward, you need to understand that you're in an active threat zone. If we encounter anything at all that seems unusual or dangerous, you are to report it to me immediately. And if the threat is larger than we can handle, then we retreat and report to the village, Kakashi said. I know you're used to fighting to the end, but out here, survival takes priority over heroics. Naruto nodded, understanding the implicit message. Kakashi was worried about him, was trying to set reasonable boundaries and expectations. I won't do anything reckless, Naruto promised. I know you will, Kakashi replied with a trace of wry humor. That's why I'm here to stop you. That night, Naruto slept better than he had in days. For the first time since his reincarnation, he felt like he was moving towards something rather than away from it. The weight of secrecy and suppression was lifting, being replaced by the simpler, cleaner weight of a purpose and a mission. The disturbances in the northern mountains became apparent as soon as they entered the affected zone. The forest there was strange, trees twisted into unusual shapes, vegetation growing in patterns that defied natural explanation, and a constant shimmer in the air as though the space itself was somehow unstable. Reiko's chakra sensors began registering unusual patterns immediately. There's something here, she said, her hands moving in the diagnostic signs that sensor types use to extend their perception. Multiple presences, but they're not normal. The chakra signature is completely foreign. Otsutsuki, Naruto said quietly, but not so quietly that only Kakashi could hear. Both Reiko and Tetsu turned to look at him. What makes you say that? Tetsu asked, his hand drifting toward his weapon. Because I've felt this presence before, Naruto said, deciding in that moment to be more truthful than his cover story would suggest. During training, there are seals in Konoha designed to detect Otsutsuki incursions. This matches the signature of those seals. It was a lie, technically. The seals didn't exist. But it was a plausible enough lie that neither Reiko nor Tetsu questioned it further. As they moved deeper into the affected zone, the disturbances grew more pronounced. The air itself seemed to pulse with an energy that was profoundly alien, and the Rinnegan was pressing against Naruto's consciousness with increasing urgency. There's something here, it seemed to whisper. Something important. Something that needs to be confronted. There, Kakashi said, pointing toward a clearing in the distance. In the center of the clearing, the forest had simply stopped existing. Where trees should have grown, there was only barren stone, and in the center of that stone was a perfectly circular aperture, a gateway, or perhaps a scar, left by something passing through the barrier between worlds. What is that? Reiko breathed, her sensors overloading as they tried to process the energy radiating from the opening. A wound, Naruto said, and he knew with certainty that he was speaking truth. A place where something has torn through the space between dimensions. And whatever made it is still nearby. As if in response to his words, the Rinnegan suddenly activated, erupting from his eyes without his conscious command. Purple light flooded the clearing, and Naruto felt his connection to the surrounding space sharpen dramatically. There, in the forest to the north, a presence, vast and alien and utterly wrong. Run, Naruto said to Kakashi, and then he was moving forward, the Rinnegan's power manifesting fully as he prepared for a confrontation that could not be avoided. The second chance at life, it seemed, was about to be tested in ways he had never imagined. And for the first time since his reincarnation, Naruto Uzumaki felt ready to face it. The clearing erupted into chaos. As soon as Naruto's Rinnegan fully activated, the presence in the forest responded. Trees twisted and groaned as something massive moved through them, creating a path of destruction that spoke to the sheer physical power of whatever was approaching. Move! Kakashi shouted, grabbing Reiko and Tetsu and pulling them backward. Create distance! Naruto stood his ground in the center of the clearing, his purple eyes fixed on the approaching threat. He could sense it more clearly now with the Rinnegan's sensory perception at full capacity, a being of immense chakra, distinctly Otsutsuki in nature, but subtly different from the one that had killed him before. Younger, perhaps. Less experienced. But no less dangerous. The figure emerged from the tree line, and Naruto's breath caught. It was humanoid, but only barely. Its skin was pale and luminescent, its eyes were completely black with silver pupils, and its body seemed to exist partially outside normal space, as though it wasn't entirely committed to being in this dimension. Around it, the very fabric of reality seemed to shimmer and distort. Ah, the Otsutsuki said, its voice echoing strangely, as though coming from multiple directions at once. The Rinnegan. How delightful. I felt a beacon, but I wasn't certain what would be here. Now I see. The power has been reborn into this dimension. This one is under the protection of Konoha, Kakashi called out, positioning himself between Naruto and the creature while maintaining careful distance. Stand down, or face the full force of the village's defenses. The Otsutsuki laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The village? What is a village to beings such as we? The Rinnegan is a power that transcends the petty conflicts of mortals. I will take it, and together we will reshape this world in the image of the Otsutsuki clan. Not happening, Naruto said, and he reached into the depths of the Rinnegan's power. The next moments happened at a speed that would be difficult for normal observers to follow. Naruto activated the Bansho Tenin, drawing the Otsutsuki toward him with the attractive force. The creature resisted, using its own reality distortion abilities to anchor itself in place. The two forces clashed in the space between them, and the very air seemed to scream under the pressure. But Naruto was no longer suppressing. For the first time since his reincarnation, he was fighting at something approaching his true capacity, and the difference was immediate and staggering. The Otsutsuki was yanked forward through the air despite its resistance. It twisted, moving with an alien grace that allowed it to redirect the force partially, but it couldn't escape entirely. Naruto brought his hand down in a hammer strike empowered by the Rinnegan's gravitational manipulation, and the ground beneath the creature simply ceased to exist. The impact created a crater 50 meters across. Go! Naruto shouted to Kakashi. Get Reiko and Tetsu away from here. This is beyond what you can handle. Kakashi hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. He grabbed both shinobi and began moving away from the clearing at maximum speed. Naruto turned his full attention to the Otsutsuki. The creature emerged from the crater, unharmed but clearly enraged. It moved with terrifying speed, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. Naruto barely managed to erect a barrier of gravitational force before it reached him, and the impact of the creature's attack still sent him sliding backward several meters. They clashed again and again, either gaining a clear advantage. The Otsutsuki's reality distortion abilities were formidable, allowing it to partially negate the Rinnegan's gravitational manipulation. But Naruto had months of secret training behind his movements, months of learning to maximize the dojutsu's potential. It was barely enough. The battle lasted perhaps 3 minutes, though time seemed to stretch in the intensity of combat. Eventually, Naruto saw an opening, a moment when the Otsutsuki overextended itself. He drew upon one of the Rinnegan's more devastating techniques, the Shinra Tensei, and released a burst of repelling force that sent the creature flying backward with tremendous force. The Otsutsuki slammed into the barrier between dimensions, and the impact seemed to cause it significant damage. It screamed, a sound of rage and pain, and then it was gone, pulled back through the dimensional wound, retreating to whatever realm it had emerged from. The aperture in reality began to seal itself, the wounds slowly closing. Naruto stood alone in the clearing, breathing heavily, his Rinnegan still pulsing with active power. He had won. But the victory felt incomplete somehow. The Otsutsuki had been young and inexperienced compared to the one that had killed him before. If a stronger creature had appeared, he might not have survived the encounter, which meant he needed to become stronger, and that realization crystallized into a decision right there in the clearing, surrounded by the evidence of their battle. Naruto would not return to Konoha. Not yet. Not until he had learned to fully master the Rinnegan's power. When Kakashi found him 3 hours later, Naruto had already made his arrangements. His former teacher appeared at the edge of the clearing, alone and moving cautiously, his Sharingan active and searching for threats. Report, Kakashi said, his tone suggesting he was speaking as a commander rather than a mentor. It was a young Otsutsuki, Naruto replied. Probably a scout of some kind, searching for signs of the Rinnegan's re-emergence. It's gone now, pulled back through the dimensional wound. The gateway is sealed. And you? I'm fine, Naruto said. The battle was manageable. Kakashi studied him carefully, and Naruto could see the moment understanding dawned in his former teacher's eye. You're not coming back to the village. Not yet, Naruto confirmed. Kakashi, that creature was young and relatively inexperienced. It nearly had me several times. If a more powerful Otsutsuki had appeared, or if multiple creatures had attacked simultaneously, I would have lost. I need more training. More time to understand what I'm capable of. The Hokage won't approve of this, Kakashi said. No, Naruto agreed. But tell the Hokage that the situation is more serious than anyone realized. The Otsutsuki are searching. They know the Rinnegan has reawakened, and they're sending scouts to locate and reclaim it. I need time to prepare. And more importantly, I need distance from the village. Every moment I'm in Konoha, I'm a beacon drawing these creatures closer to innocent people. Kakashi was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. How long? He asked. I don't know, Naruto said honestly. Months at least. Maybe longer. And what will you do? Train alone in the mountains? There are places, Naruto said, thinking back to the monastery where he had first awakened. Locations where my power won't draw as much attention. I'll find them, and I'll train. This is insanity, Kakashi said flatly. You're a young man, Naruto. You need guidance, support, people around you. Not solitude. I need strength more than I need companionship, Naruto replied, and the words came out harder than he intended. I need to become something capable of handling threats at an Otsutsuki's level. The village can help me with that. No one can. This is something I have to do alone. Kakashi looked away, his visible eye distant. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. Then I'll tell the Hokage that you've decided to pursue independent training, far from the village, to develop greater control over the Rinnegan. I'll frame it as a strategic decision, keeping the beacon of your power away from civilian populations while you work to master it. Thank you, Naruto said. Don't thank me, Kakashi replied harshly. Just don't die out there. I've already mourned you once. I'd prefer not to do it again. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Naruto alone in the clearing with his thoughts and his power. Over the following weeks, Naruto traveled through regions of the Land of Fire that few shinobi frequented, mountains high enough that the air was thin, forests so dense that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, and caves that seemed to exist in the margins between civilization and wilderness. He was searching for a location with 3 critical properties, remote enough that detecting his power would be difficult, stable enough to provide shelter and basic necessities, and defensible in case the Otsutsuki returned before he was ready for another confrontation. The answer, when he found it, was almost too perfect. It was a valley hidden between 3 converging mountain peaks, so narrow that it would be invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. A small river ran through it, providing fresh water, and there were caves carved into the rock walls, probably natural formations, though Naruto suspected they might have been shaped by shinobi centuries past, as though his predecessors had left sanctuary for those who would come after. At the center of the valley was a structure, a small temple or shrine, partially ruined but still structurally sound. The architecture was ancient, the style suggesting it dated back to the time of the Sage of the Six Paths himself. And when Naruto activated the Rinnegan and extended his sensory perception, he felt it. Seals. Protective barriers woven into the very fabric of the valley. Seals that were designed to obscure chakra signatures and prevent external detection. It was perfect. Naruto spent the first week simply cleaning and preparing the space. He repaired the temple's roof, cleared debris from the main chamber, and set about turning the ruins into something livable. He created meditation spaces, training areas, and a small garden where he could grow basic crops. Once the physical space was prepared, he turned his attention to training. The Rinnegan, Naruto discovered through months of experimental practice, was fundamentally different from other dojutsu in one critical way. It was not a single power, but rather a collection of 6 distinct powers, each one corresponding to one of the 6 paths of the Sage of the Six Paths. The first path was the path of Deva, the power over gravity and attraction/repulsion forces. Naruto had already discovered this, but he spent weeks learning to refine it, to extend its range, to apply it with surgical precision rather than as a blunt instrument. The second path was the path of Asura, the power over machinery and technology, and more fundamentally, the ability to manipulate one's own body and physical form. Through meditation and experimentation, Naruto discovered he could enhance his physical capabilities to superhuman levels, could reconfigure his skeletal structure if necessary, could create additional limbs or weapons from his own body. The third path was the path of human, the power to read minds and extract information directly from consciousness. This path proved both fascinating and disturbing. Naruto only experimented with it once, reading the thoughts of a small animal he had captured for the purpose, and the invasiveness of the technique horrified him enough that he was reluctant to use it again. The fourth path was the path of animal, the power of summoning and controlling creatures. Unlike the summoning contracts that normal shinobi used, this path granted dominion over creatures on a much more fundamental level. Naruto summoned a variety of creatures, birds, large cats, serpents, and discovered he could control them with perfect precision, could see through their eyes, could use them as remote scouts. The fifth path was the path of Preta, the power to absorb all forms of chakra. This was one of the most dangerous abilities, as it required careful control to prevent overloading his system with foreign energy. But Naruto practiced it extensively, learning to absorb natural chakra from the environment, from plants and animals, even from the earth itself. The sixth and final path was the path of Naraka, the power over death and resurrection, the ability to judge souls and potentially return them to life. This path remained largely locked to him. He could sense its presence within the Rinnegan, could feel its power hovering just beyond his reach, but he couldn't quite bridge the gap to accessing it directly. In addition to the six paths, there was another power, something that seemed to transcend the six divisions entirely. It was a technique that the sage of the six paths had called the outer path, the ability to create additional bodies that could be controlled remotely, each one capable of wielding all six paths independently. This power terrified Naruto. The idea of creating multiple versions of himself, each one a potential threat or weakness, seemed antithetical to everything he was trying to achieve. He deliberately avoided studying the outer path, afraid of what might happen if he gave it too much attention. 3 months into his isolated training, Naruto achieved a breakthrough that would define his entire approach to the Rinnegan. He had been meditating, attempting to understand the relationship between the six paths, when he sensed something, a connection between them, a way in which they were all expressions of a single unified power rather than six separate abilities. The Rinnegan wasn't six different techniques. It was one technique, viewed from six different angles. The realization was profound, and it opened entirely new possibilities. If the six paths were expressions of a unified power, then perhaps they could be combined in ways that created new techniques, hybrid abilities that wouldn't normally be possible. Naruto spent the next month testing this theory, experimenting with combinations. The path of Deva combined with the path of Asura created a technique that allowed him to manipulate gravity while simultaneously reinforcing his own body to withstand the stresses it created. He could push gravity to extremes without being crushed by the force of his own technique. The path of animal combined with the path of Preta allowed him to summon creatures and automatically absorb their chakra when they were defeated, creating a kind of renewable energy source. The path of human combined with the path of Deva allowed him to sense minds at a distance using gravity manipulation, detecting consciousness through the subtle disturbances it created in space. These combinations opened up tactical possibilities that he hadn't considered before, applications of the power that could be used without drawing excessive attention or creating massive destruction. By the 4th month, Naruto was beginning to develop actual fighting styles and techniques, rather than simply using raw power inefficiently. But as his understanding of the Rinnegan deepened, Naruto began to notice something troubling. The more he used the power, the more he felt it trying to reshape him. There was a subtle pressure in his consciousness, like the dojutsu was whispering suggestions about how to use its abilities more effectively, about possibilities for expansion and conquest. It was the corruption that the sage of the six paths had warned him about in the dream. Naruto noticed it first in small ways, a moment of anger when a training attempt failed, followed by an impulse to destroy everything around him. A moment of frustration when the path of human proved more difficult to control, followed by temptation to use it to dominate the minds of nearby animals, to bend them to his will completely. These urges frightened him, because they didn't feel like his own thoughts. They felt like they were coming from outside himself, from the Rinnegan itself, as though the dojutsu had its own personality, and was slowly influencing his actions. It was the same effect he had observed in other Rinnegan users throughout history. Nagato, who had been corrupted into believing that pain was the only teacher. Madara, who had used the power to create a world of illusion. Even the sage of the six paths himself had struggled with the corruption, eventually splitting his power to prevent any single being from becoming too overwhelmed. Naruto realized, with mounting horror, that he might be fighting a losing battle. One evening, in a moment of desperation, he called out to the meditation space, not expecting anything, but needing to voice the fear. Sage of the six paths, he said quietly into the darkness. If you can hear me, I need guidance. The Rinnegan is changing me. I can feel it. I'm becoming something other than what I was. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the space around him seemed to shimmer, and the sage appeared, not as a solid apparition, but as a presence, a consciousness that seemed to occupy the same space as Naruto without being fully present. You are correct, the sage said, his voice echoing in ways that suggested it was coming from all directions at once. The Rinnegan cannot be wielded without consequence. It is a power that demands sacrifice, and that sacrifice is always the same, the identity of the user. Then what's the point? Naruto demanded. If wielding it means losing myself, why not just seal it away? Why not let it die with me? Because, the sage replied, there is a path through the corruption. Not around it, but through it. You must learn to accept the Rinnegan not as a tool, but as a part of yourself. Not as something external that is influencing you, but as an expression of your own potential. I don't understand, Naruto said. You will, the sage assured him. But not yet. For now, you must train harder. You must push past the point where the corruption becomes unbearable, and you must learn to integrate it rather than resist it. It is the only way to maintain your sanity while wielding such power. The presence faded, leaving Naruto alone again with his thoughts and his fear. The next several months were perhaps the most difficult of Naruto's existence. He pushed himself relentlessly, training from dawn to dark, manifesting all 6 paths in combination with each other, creating new techniques, testing new combinations, always pushing at the boundaries of what the Rinnegan could do, and with each use, he felt the corruption pressing harder. There were moments when he barely recognized himself. Moments when he looked into a pool of water and saw something other than Naruto Uzumaki looking back, something colder, more powerful, more utterly alien. The loneliness was profound. He had no one to talk to, no one to confide in, no one to ground him in his humanity. The animals he summoned were useful for training and companionship, but they couldn't provide the connection he desperately needed. He began to understand, on a visceral level, why previous Rinnegan users had gone mad. The power was too much for one person to carry alone. It demanded either sharing the burden with others, or allowing it to consume the user's identity entirely. But Naruto persisted, because the alternative, giving up, sealing the power away, potentially allowing it to reemerge in someone else, seemed worse. He modified his training environment, creating barriers within the temple that would prevent him from causing massive destruction if he lost control completely. He set up meditation spaces designed to help him maintain focus and control. He even created a kind of journal, recording his experiences and observations about the Rinnegan's nature, trying to preserve some record of his thoughts in case he did lose himself. And slowly, incrementally, he began to find a balance. The corruption didn't disappear. It never would. But as the sage had said, Naruto learned to integrate it rather than resist it. He began to understand the Rinnegan not as something that was trying to control him, but as a reflection of potentials that had always existed within him. The capacity for power, for dominance, for reshaping the world according to his will. But alongside those potentials existed other capacities. The ability to connect with others, to feel compassion, to recognize the value in people and things beyond the pure exercise of power. The Rinnegan amplified all of his capacities, both the light and the dark. And by understanding that, by accepting that part of himself alongside his more compassionate side, Naruto finally began to achieve real stability. 9 months into his isolation, as autumn was transitioning toward winter, Naruto received an unexpected visitor. The valley's protective seals should have prevented anyone from entering undetected, but somehow the figure managed to pass through them. Naruto was meditating when he sensed the presence, and his first reaction was to activate the Rinnegan in full combat readiness. But then recognition struck him. It was Mizuki. She emerged from the forest at the valley's entrance, moving with obvious effort. The journey must have been exhausting for someone with her level of training. She carried a pack on her back and wore travel-worn clothes, and her expression held a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "How did you find me?" was the first thing Naruto asked. "The old records," Mizuki replied, setting down her pack and breathing heavily. "The ones I showed you before. They contained descriptions of several sanctuary locations. This was the most likely candidate, based on what you told me about what you were looking for. You traveled here alone? That's incredibly dangerous. Less dangerous than letting you waste away in isolation, Mizuki replied sharply. Naruto, 9 months. It's been 9 months without any contact with anyone. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? Naruto didn't answer, because he knew that Mizuki was right. The isolation had been necessary for training, but it had also been slowly eroding his connection to his humanity. I brought supplies, Mizuki continued, opening her pack. Food, medicine, books, paper for writing. And I brought news from Konoha. Things you should know. Over the next several hours, Mizuki brought him up to date on village events. The Hokage had accepted Kakashi's report, and had authorized Naruto's independent training, though most of the village believed he had simply chosen to leave permanently. The ANBU had set up monitoring stations in the mountains to watch for additional Otsutsuki incursions, so far without results. And Mizuki herself had become something of a keeper of Naruto's secret, managing information about him carefully, ensuring that key people knew he was alive but discouraging any actual search efforts. I can't let you do this, Naruto said finally. You're putting yourself at risk by even being here. If anyone discovered that you know where I am, then I'll deal with that consequence, Mizuki said firmly. But I'm not leaving you alone in this valley to slowly go insane from isolation. So you have 2 choices. Accept my presence here for at least the next several weeks, or fight me right now and prove to yourself that the Rinnegan has made you less human, not more. It was a challenge that cut straight to the heart of Naruto's struggle. And it was, he realized, exactly what he needed. Stay, he said finally. At least for a while. With Mizuki's presence, something fundamental shifted in Naruto's training. She wasn't skilled enough to train with him in direct combat, but she could serve as a sounding board, someone to talk to about the philosophical and psychological aspects of what he was experiencing. More importantly, she was a reminder that he was still human, still capable of connection and emotion, even while wielding godlike power. In the weeks that followed, Naruto found that having someone to share the burden made it lighter in ways he couldn't have anticipated. He showed Mizuki the techniques he had developed, explained the 6 paths and how they related to each other. She listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and helped him organize his thoughts in ways that clarified his understanding. And slowly, the balance he had been seeking began to solidify. By the time winter was approaching, Naruto had achieved something close to mastery of the Rinnegan. Not complete mastery, he suspected that would take years or even decades, but sufficient control that he could wield all 6 paths simultaneously, create hybrid techniques, and maintain stability even under extreme stress. More importantly, he had reintegrated with his humanity. The corruption of the power was still present, still whispered its temptations, but it no longer felt like it was trying to consume him. Instead, it felt like a potential, something he could draw on if he needed to, but didn't have to yield to. You should go back to Konoha, Mizuki said one evening as they sat watching the winter sun set over the mountains. I'm not ready, Naruto replied. You are, Mizuki corrected gently. You've mastered the basic applications of the Rinnegan. You can control the corruption. You can integrate the power with your humanity. What more do you hope to gain by staying here? Naruto didn't have a good answer to that. The truth was, part of him was afraid of returning to a world where people knew what he was, afraid of the responsibility that came with such power, afraid of what might happen if the Otsutsuki returned while he was anywhere near populated areas. Give it 1 more month, he said. Let me strengthen the valley's defenses further. Let me create contingencies in case the Otsutsuki return. And then we'll see if I'm truly ready to rejoin the world. Mizuki smiled slightly. 1 more month. But Naruto, you need to understand something. You can never fully rejoin the world. Not with the Rinnegan. You'll always be apart, always be different, always be someone who walks between the divine and mortal realms. Accepting that, not as a burden, but as a reality, is perhaps the final piece of your training. As winter deepened around them, Naruto considered her words, and began to understand that she was right. The time had come to stop hiding from what he was, and to start learning how to live as it openly.